of Orthodox spirituality.
Lord, have mercy, Lord, have mercy.
A wondrous journey into Orthodoxy.
Lord, have mercy.
Prepared and presented by Angeliki Antonakou, Lekea.
Lord have mercy, 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 Lord have mercy.
Lord have mercy, 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 Lord have mercy. Lord have mercy, Lord have mercy. Lord have mercy.
Hello, dear listeners. We are continuing to read from the book Spiritual Awakening, the second volume in the series Spiritual Counsels by Saint Paisios.
Wisdom, let my prayer arise in thy sight as incense.
Chapter 2. Monasteries are the fortresses of the Church. The monk is a beacon of light upon the rocks. Yeroda, what is the work of a monk? The work of a monk is to become a vessel of the Holy Spirit. A monk must make his heart as sensitive as the gold leaf used by iconographers. The entire work of the monk is love, just as he became a monk out of love for God, which includes love for one's neighbor. The monk meditates upon the sufferings of society. His heart is pained, and he prays from the heart constantly for all the people. Thus he helps the world through his prayer. There are monks who help the people more than the whole world together could help them. For example, a worldly person may give a couple of oranges or a kilo of rice to some poor person, often just to be seen by others, while all along criticizing others for not helping. But a monk can silently offer tons of help through his prayer. A monk doesn't make his own worldly plans for missionary work, but proceeds without any plan of his own, and the benevolent God takes him into his own divine plan, and in his divine way, he will send him to do missionary work if needed. God doesn't ask monks to go out into the world to hold people's hands and help them walk. He asks them by their life to provide a light to guide people to eternal life. In other words, the monk's mission is not to help people by being in the world. A monk flees far from the world, not because he hates people, but because he loves them, and only by living far from the world will he be able to help them with his prayer in whatever cannot be done by human means, but only through divine intervention. This is why a monk must be in constant communion with God, to receive messages and to show people the way to God. I couldn't understand how the Roman Catholics justify certain things. My query was answered a few years ago when two Roman Catholic architects from Rome came by my Calivi. They were ignorant, but meant well. They asked me, "What are the monks doing by staying here? Why don't they go out into the world to do social work?" I said, "Aren't beacons always set upon rocky heights? Why should they go to the cities and be added to the streetlights? Lighthouses have one mission and street lights have another. The monk is not a small streetlight to be put in the city at the side of the street to light pedestrians so they don't stumble. A monk is an isolated beacon positioned high on the crags of a rocky shore to provide light and direction for those upon the seas and the oceans, so that they may guide their ships to reach their destination, to reach God." The quiet preaching of the monk. I will pray that you 3 novices don't grow up, but remain as you are now with those blue headscarves at that height and that age. Do you realize how people are quietly helped when they see you? For in the world today, people can't easily find a proper young girl. Most are wild, with a cigarette in their hand, making unpleasant grimaces. And when people see here young girls dedicated, chanting, joyful, they ask themselves, what's happening here? Something's going on. We can't say they're stupid, because they aren't. We can't say they're missing something, because they aren't. It's clear there's something higher here. Indeed, do you know how much this helps? When worldly people visit a monastery and see proper monks, then even if they are unbelievers, if they are well disposed, they can become believers. Many atheist scientists who came to the Holy Mountain just for a visit have changed their way of life. They are troubled, in the good sense, by what they see and hear, and are helped. They see young men who are joyful, who had every opportunity to succeed in the world, but who have abandoned wealth, position, and so forth, to live ascetically, with prayer and vigils, and they ask themselves, what is going on here? If indeed God exists, if there is another life, if there is a hell, what am I doing with my life? So they rein in their sinful way of life, or correct it altogether. I know of one case. A young woman of 20 attempted suicide by cutting her veins, but was saved in time. After that, a monk took her to a monastery. The poor thing was wild, but when she saw the nuns there, she quickly recovered. I see another world here, she said, and asked, may I stay here? This is the silent preaching of the monks. Many preach, but few inspire confidence in what they say because they don't practice what they preach. A monk doesn't deliver sermons out loud to be heard by others, but preaches Christ silently with his life and helps with his prayer. He lives the gospel, and the grace of God gives him away. Thus the gospel is preached in the most effective way, something which people thirst to see and hear, especially today. And when the monk speaks, he doesn't simply offer a thought, he speaks from his experience. But even if he does express a thought, even this is enlightened. Yaroda, some people say that young men and women enter a monastery because they are disillusioned or have some disability, or even because they are weak in the head. It seems that these people have 1 or 2 such cases in mind, and then go on unfairly, out of spite or envy, to malign 90% of the monks. But if they look closely, they see that this is not the case, and they will admit that there is indeed something higher there, that God does indeed exist. This is why a monk must always set a good example for other people. Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven. Matthew 5, verse 16. A true monk is the light of the world. What does St. John Climacus say? The angels serve as light to the monks, and the monks serve as light to the people of the world. See John Climacus, The Ladder of Divine Ascent, Step 26-23. When the monk can be distinguished from people of the world, then he can have a positive effect upon them. What helps the people in the world who are suffering over vain things is holiness, which, through its simplicity, teaches them to grasp the deeper meaning of life and dispel the heaviness in their heart. The monk and the renewal of the world. Monks are Christ's regular army, and that's why they're not paid. You see how many people who come to visit the Holy Mountain can never forget it. Wherever else they go, people will ask them for money, and so on. While on the Holy Mountain, all they have to do is present their visitor's permit, and after that they can go anywhere they wish without paying anything. They will eat free, they will sleep free. They find something different and are helped spiritually. When I was at the Kalivi of the Precious Cross, the elder lived at the Kalivi of the Precious Cross during the years 1969 to 1978, someone came who had many problems. We spoke for an hour and a half. Then he took out a 500 drachma note. "What's that?" I asked him. "For a simple visit to the doctor, we pay at least this much," he told me. Please forgive me, is it perhaps not enough? Some European community officials who came to the Holy Mountain after the last fire to assess the situation and see how they could help came by the Kalivi. In our conversation, I told them, "We came here to give, not to receive." "This is the first time we have heard this," they told me, and made a note of it immediately. These words were spoken in May 1991. We didn't become monks to receive material goods. We became monks to be able to give spiritual things without any material benefit, to be free of worldly cares so we can devote all of our time to our spiritual responsibilities. We left the world and went into the ascetic life for the love of Christ, to liberate ourselves from the passions and to liberate others as well. Our goal is to help people with our prayer and through our example, so that they may experience a spiritual rebirth. When someone leaves the world and enters the monastery, he or she becomes a spiritual father or a spiritual mother. When a young woman becomes a nun, she is married. She becomes a bride of Christ, a spiritual mother, and helps people to be spiritually reborn. For example, with her prayer, she helps in the creation of good Christian families. But besides prayer, in certain circumstances, she must also offer assistance to people on the human level. Every good nun, besides the prayer she offers for people, provides great help with her manner, with the right approach, with a few words of spiritual guidance she speaks to a pilgrim to help him grasp the deeper meaning of life, or to a mother to encourage her. But for a nun to want to communicate with the world is useless, because such social contacts conflict with the spiritual laws, and as a result, we suffer. As much as you can, seek to be active in obscurity. I make a comparison and it pains me. Some monks enjoy going to festivals, visits, and having spiritual friendships. When I'm forced to go somewhere for spiritual work, I feel as if I am going to be tormented, and I see it as a waste of time. Yeroda, when a nun is mature in years but immature spiritually, what is at fault? She doesn't examine herself carefully and doesn't do the necessary spiritual work. The problem begins from there. Let us assume that Christ didn't call someone to become a nun, and she stayed in the world and became a mother. Then she wouldn't have demands of others, but others would have demands of her. She would have given much and would have received much with the sacrifice she would have made. In the monastery, she must become a spiritual mother. Her mission is higher than a mother's. But now what happens? She enters the monastery at a young age, and if she doesn't make proper spiritual progress, continues to think of herself as a child. But she must realize that she isn't a child who thinks, we have our mother, we have our home, we are carefree, and I don't have a care in the world. She must give of herself and assist in the younger sister's spiritual rebirth through her behavior, or help the pilgrims who come to the monastery and sacrifice herself in everything, and she shall receive without asking. If a nun doesn't offer herself in this manner, everything is lost. She remains in an undeveloped state and wants constantly to take from both the young and the old without giving of herself. She cultivates a sickly spirit and doesn't mature because she doesn't offer herself to others. I see in some monks precisely the condition of a Bedouin whom I had known at Mount Sinai. He was 65 years old and said, "I too have no father. I am an orphan." At 65, people have grandchildren. 2 and 3 generations have passed, and he still says, "I too have no father," and is still seeking a father's love. We monks, if we are not careful, can remain children, and this is bad. But if the nun or monk thinks what she or he would be doing in the world at her age, she could say, "Now, I shouldn't be looking for human consolation. I must sacrifice myself and not make demands on others." Most of them come to the monastery at a young age, find spiritual parents, and may remain in a childish condition with childish requests, whereas if they had stayed in the world, they would have become parents. In other words, they remain forever children, not in the good sense, but in the immature sense. They will grow old, but unless they exercise their mind, they may, for example, get excited over a piece of candy or a piece of clothing. There was an elderly monk on the holy mountain who used to say, "My spiritual father got me a woolen sweater," and would show this sweater given to him by his elder. He was as excited as a small child whose mother has bought him a braided jacket. We must be children in our innocence, but not in our way of thinking. For otherwise, how will bravery enter into our life? How are we to acquire a manly and mature spirit? A monk, in order to progress spiritually, must soften his hard heart and try to make it like a mother's heart. Even a nun, in order to make spiritual progress, must acquire a little manliness. Spiritual modesty transforms others. Yaroda, how can someone who enters a monastery discard the worldly state of mind, the worldly air that he still has? When he enters the monastery, he must forget the world, and then must not forget that he is in a monastery. At home, perhaps he wasn't helped, wasn't brought up properly, but now it is important what kind of spiritual education he receives here in the monastery. Of course, it will be a monastic education. The monastery is a sacred place. The outside world is something else. When someone is aware of being in a sacred place, modesty and restraint come by themselves. But if one forgets and imagines oneself in the world while in the monastery, how then can modesty be cultivated? A nun must move about in a natural manner, with simplicity, with humility, and not try to look wretched. Such behavior is repulsive and disgusting. In some novice sisters who walk with an air of confident pride, I see something worldly. They walk like brides in the world, not brides of Christ. Whereas I observe something sacred in those who walk with a modest gait. What a difference between the one and the other. One can immediately understand what monasticism is. If you observe the wheat stalks, you will notice that the ones which are standing tall and upright have nothing inside, whereas the wheat stalks which are mature and ripe are bending downward. A devout monk can transform others who look upon him. Just today, a priest monk came whom I have known for many years. Even though he is not particularly handsome, that is, he does not have an external beauty, every time he received Holy Communion, I saw him glow. But even when he was not receiving Holy Communion, I detected a light, a spiritual gleam in his face. just as the asphalt on the roads can be seen with a gleaming shine from a distance in the summer, even though it is tar, so in this case one can see brightness in someone who is not handsome. This, of course, is not a very good example, but what can one put forward as an example? The spiritual condition of his inner being endows him with an external glow. This is spiritual beauty, grace, divine grace. In contrast, other clerics who are externally handsome, but who have a worldly spirit and move about with an air of worldly pride, are so repulsive. You see someone who is entirely secular. Apart from his ordination as a clergyman, there is nothing else spiritual to see. A person's face mirrors his soul. This is what Christ said. The light of the body is the eye. If therefore thine eye be single, thy whole body shall be full of light. Matthew 6, verse 22. If someone has simplicity, humility, there is divine enlightenment, and he shines. Now, this is what a monk must achieve. Yeroda, Saint Nilos the Calavros, says that from the moment someone is tonsured to be a monk, he will become either an angel or a devil. Does this mean that there is nothing in between? What he means is that a monastic person must seek to do the very best possible work in his calling. This is why when a monk of the great habit falls into mortal sin, God allows a rod to fall upon him for the purpose of expiation. Sometimes we imagine that grace can be obtained by external means, in an artificial or magical manner. But this way neither God nor the person himself is at ease, and others are also not put at ease by such superficial spirituality. Some monks, for example, make broad and long, great habits, reaching down to their feet, with red crosses, roses, red branches, and many letters, and they open their cassock to reveal the habit, like the Pharisees, who make broad their phylacteries and enlarge the borders of their garments. Matthew 23, verse 5, to show that they pray a lot. But in the past one could barely see the habit under the cassock of a monk as he walked. In fact, many wore a small habit underneath to hide it altogether. Now we have vain and empty things. Is this how they will receive grace from the habit? The habit abhors them and grace departs. The goal is to become a monk of the great habit from within. And anyone who is a monk of the great habit from within will hide his external habit. An external object does not bring about the inner transformation. Thus, man remains on the external plane, and in the end, Christ will tell us, I know you not. Matthew 25, verse 12. The monastery's goal is a spiritual one. A monk is interested in his own salvation and in the salvation of all the living and departed. For a monk, the real divine love is to be found in the pain endured for the salvation of his soul and in the pain endured for the salvation of all the people in the world. The dedicated soul of a monk contributes to the salvation not only of his family members, but also of his compatriots. This is why there was a good tradition in Asia Minor to have at least one monk from every group of kinsmen, in order to have him intercede for all the others. In Farasa, when someone became a monk, the entire town would celebrate and say, "He will be of great help to our town as well." A monk, of course, would never say, "I want to save the world," but he will surely pray for the salvation of all the people in the world, together with his own salvation. And when the benevolent God hears his prayer and indeed helps the people, the monk again would not say, "I saved the people," but rather, "God saved the people." The monk must attain the spiritual state where he will be able to say, "My God, do not look at me, do not have mercy on me, but look and have mercy on the people of the world." And he can say this not because he has no need of God's mercy, but because he has so much love for other people. Yeroda, to what extent should a monk abandon himself in order to help the people? To the extent that he can see people benefiting. If I abandon myself entirely into the hands of worldly people, I too will become worldly. When a monk does things presumably to help worldly people, which however are not appropriate in a monasticism, then the worldly people will not benefit. A monk can, for example, be an excellent taxi driver, not charging his customers and teaching them spiritual things, but this is not monasticism. Sometimes one can find monks who have a worldly spirit and lay persons who have a monastic spirit. This is why in the other life Christ will say to some, "You take off that monastic habit and you put it on." The layperson who desires the life of the monk is sanctified, while the monk who desires the worldly life will be tormented. Can someone understand if he is not properly positioned in his calling? Even if he doesn't understand, if there is something wrong, he will not have complete peace and serenity in his soul. His soul will not find peace in whatever is not appropriate to monasticism. And from the moment his soul does not find peace, he must seek to find out what is wrong. Someone I knew went to a monastery and then came to tell me there is light manufacturing going on there, and the abbess is good for Monastery in Athens, where she will be a great salesperson of buttons. In other words, the monastery had become a shop of light manufacturing. After that, it becomes a manufacturing unit, then a supermarket, and then a hypermarket. The poor lay people expect something higher from us monks, and to reach this higher spiritual state, we must avoid every human consolation. The goal of the monasteries is a spiritual one, and no worldly element should exist there. Only a heavenly one, where the souls can be inundated with heavenly delights. In worldly matters, we cannot compete with the people of the world, for they have more abundant means. Do you know how a monastery living a thoroughly spiritual life can positively affect people in the world? When there is devotion, fear of God, and neither worldly rationalism nor a commercial spirit, this is what moves and inspires lay people. But unfortunately, the commercial spirit is gradually entering into the very marrow of monasticism. A monk had come to my kalivi while I was weaving in Koboskini. You give away the prayer Koboskinia as a blessing to your visitors, but I can sell that Koboskini of 33 knots that you're making for 500 drachmas, and I don't make it like you do. As soon as I finish the knots, I cut it and sew it a little so I don't lose the threads. I even use the threads which I cut from the cross. I connect them without using any beads, and this way I make more profit. You should be ashamed of yourself, I told him. Don't you realize that you are possessed by a commercial spirit? I've been a monk since 1950, and this is the first time I've seen such an attitude. Yeroda, few people are so truly mature spiritually that they can help others. Yes, sadly, there are so few. No wonder people go astray. Do you know how much I pray for God to present to the world true and authentic Christians who will be able to help people? It's enough for the people if you feel for them a little and don't exploit them. They don't ask for anything more than that. In the world, they are constantly at war and feel insecure. When they go to a properly functioning monastery, they benefit, for they feel secure, and this gives them consolation and encouragement to continue their struggle. In these difficult times, people don't lack material food so much as they do spiritual food. People don't lack bread, even though this too is needed in many parts of the world and will soon be more difficult to obtain. They need spiritual help. We must concentrate on helping the whole world with our prayer. Let us, for example, help prevent a family from breaking up. or help a mother to raise her poor children properly. Let us try to support the devoted ones. Dear listeners, our time is up. Thank you for listening. We will continue once again where we left off in our next show. Until then, be well.
Lord, have mercy. Lord, have mercy. Lord, have
Readings of Orthodox Spirituality.
Lord, have mercy. Lord, have mercy.
A wondrous journey into Orthodoxy.
Lord, have mercy.
Prepared and presented by Angeliki Antonakou, Lekea.